in the first 30 minutes of your morning shapes the remaining 23.5 hours. Your brain is in a highly programmable state upon waking. The choices you make in that fragile window determine not only your mood, but your metabolism, memory, and even how meaningfully you connect with others. Yet most people begin with noise, notifications, news, or regret. What if, instead, you began your day with reverence, with rituals, not routines, with intention, not urgency, with the deep understanding that you are not preparing to survive the day, you are preparing to bless it. The path of inner mastery, especially after 65, is no longer about striving. It is about aligning. It is about shifting from effort to essence. And this is the deep paradox. When you stop racing against age, you begin to flow with life. When you stop clinging to control, your energy becomes lighter, more radiant, more magnetic. This is what makes the next 30 years possible, not as a battle against aging, but as a deep dance with vitality. In the quiet hours before the world begins to stir, there is a window of clarity that is often missed. Most people rise with the rush, as though the day is something to race against, something to endure. But for the woman who has reached 65 or beyond, time no longer demands to be outrun. Instead, it offers something rare, the invitation to meet oneself, not as a role, not as a title, but as the living being who has survived, endured, loved, and perhaps forgotten herself along the way. This is why the mirror, so often seen as a tool of vanity, becomes a sacred portal. When you rise in the morning, before the tasks, before the noise, before even the tea or coffee, walk toward your mirror. And before you check your hair or count the lines etched by time, do something much more radical. Look yourself in the eyes, not with criticism, not with nostalgia, but with presence. Ask yourself, not with words, but with stillness, who is she? Not who was she? Not what has she lost? Not as what did she used to be? But who is she now? This moment is not about affirmations or forced positivity. It is about recognition. Neuroscience shows us that the brain's default mode network is most impressionable in the first moments of waking. This is when the subconscious is closest to the surface. It is also when the story you tell yourself about who you are writes itself deepest into your neural pathways. If you begin your day rushing to remember your responsibilities, you anchor yourself in reaction. But if you begin with inner recognition, your day begins with intention. And intention is what separates living from merely continuing. There is a woman in a small village by the sea who, every morning, stands barefoot at her window. She has done this since her husband passed. She doesn't open her phone. She doesn't turn on the news. She simply looks out over the mist and whispers aloud to her reflection in the glass, "Today I choose peace." Not because every day is peaceful, but because peace must be chosen before it is felt. This is emotional discipline, the kind that comes not from suppressing feelings, but from directing the mind before the day has a chance to scatter it. Psychology has shown that when older adults engage in mindful self-talk or reflective practices at the start of the day, it increases their resilience to stress and improves their overall cognitive health. More than that, it influences how they relate to others, because a person who begins the day in communion with herself no longer seeks constant validation from the world outside. The mirror then becomes not a judgmental object, but a teacher, a quiet witness to your evolution. When you meet yourself in the morning, truly meet yourself, you begin to understand that aging is not decay. It is distillation. What remains is what matters. Aging, especially in women, often comes with a shifting of visibility. The world no longer sees you as it once did. You may find that people don't listen to your voice with the same attentiveness, or that your opinions are passed over in conversations. But the gift of this invisibility is that it allows you to finally see yourself without the noise of others' perceptions. So you begin each morning with the mirror, not to reclaim beauty, but to reawaken presence. You speak not to correct your image, but to connect to your essence. You remember not what you've lost, but what you've gained, the wisdom to know that inner recognition is the foundation for every other relationship in your life. Because when you can look at yourself in the morning and see not a face, but a soul, you begin to relate to others from the same place. You no longer seek connection to complete you, but to reflect you. You bring your wholeness into your conversations, your stillness into your family, your clarity into your friendships. And this, more than any anti-aging cream or supplement, is what truly keeps you alive, not just surviving, but deeply, inwardly alive. In Eastern philosophy, the concept of meeting yourself before meeting the world is central to spiritual and emotional development. It is believed that without this grounding, all other efforts are scattered. The mind becomes like a leaf in the wind, moving wherever the world pushes it. But when the day begins with a moment of rooted self-awareness, the wind may still blow, but the roots remain strong. The mirror practice, then, is not symbolic, it is deeply physiological. Studies in neuroplasticity reveal that the stories we repeatedly tell ourselves create structural changes in the brain. When you begin your day with self-recognition, gratitude, or even a single question asked with sincerity, what do I need today to remain inwardly clear? You activate a cascade of neural responses that affect not only mood, but memory, resilience, and even immune function. And from that place of stillness, another practice arises naturally. Movement, not for calories, not for strength, but for Adana's key, life energy. At 65 and beyond, movement must not be rushed. It must be reclaimed. You are no longer training to perform. You are training to preserve the integrity of your vessel. The body is not a machine. It is a garden. And like all living things, it responds to how gently or harshly it is tended. Too many women think they must push themselves to exhaustion to maintain youth. But youth is not speed, it is flow. The body needs to circulate, not be punished. Each morning, you rise and you move, not to sculpt, but to awaken. In the first light of day, with the air still soft, place your feet on the earth, whether it is a patch of grass or a cool tile floor. Let your arms rise with your breath. Let your spine stretch like a tree reaching for light. Feel your ribs expand, your jaw relax, your shoulders soften. This is not a workout. This is a ritual of remembrance. You are reminding the body that it is still a home worthy of being lived in. Neuroscience tells us that movement stimulates the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory. For older adults, this is essential not only for cognitive longevity, but for emotional balance. But it is not any movement. It is mindful movement. Walking while worrying does not help. Stretching while thinking of yesterday does little. But breathing with awareness, stepping with presence, this is what reintegrates the mind and body. There is a story of an elder woman in the mountains of northern China. Each morning, long before her grandchildren wake, she walks the same path around her home, barefoot, slow, deliberate. She raises her arms with the sun. She inhales with the trees. Her neighbors used to call it foolish. But they didn't know that she had once been bedridden with grief after her daughter died. What healed her was not medicine alone. It was this quiet ritual of movement, breath, and intention. She is now 91 and says with a smile, "I don't walk to live longer. I walk to remember that I am still alive." And this is what many forget. The point of morning movement is not longevity, it is presence. But the irony is that presence often leads to longevity. When you move slowly, your body listens, your blood flows, your joints breathe, your mind settles. Eastern medicine calls this activating the meridians. Western physiology calls it circulation and nervous system regulation. But beyond the terms, what matters is this: when you move with awareness, you meet your body again, not as something to fix, but as something to honor. And when you honor your body, your relationships change. Because pain, especially the pain of stiffness, fatigue, or chronic tension, makes the heart harder. But when the body flows, so does compassion. When you treat your body gently, you begin to treat others more gently. The irritation that might have erupted becomes a pause. The judgment that might have spoken becomes silence. And in that silence, space for love appears. This is why the morning matters so deeply. It is not about productivity. It is about alignment. And alignment is not just physical, it is relational. When your body, breath, and mind are in harmony, your presence with others becomes more patient, more attuned. You don't rush to speak. You don't rush to fix. You simply become available. And this availability, this spaciousness, is the soil where intimacy grows. Women often speak of how relationships shift after retirement, after the children leave, or after long-held roles begin to fade. Some feel adrift, others feel unseen. But when you cultivate energy through movement and clarity through self-recognition, you stop waiting for the world to see you. You begin to radiate in a way that is unmistakable, not loud, but unmistakable. There is a kind of wisdom that only the body can teach when we move without force. There is a kind of peace that only the morning can offer when we enter it slowly. And there is a kind of love that only arises in relationships when we are not pouring from depletion, but from presence. So each morning, before the world calls your name, call your own. Before the news, before the phone, before even the plans of the day, move your breath through your body. Move your body through space. And move your attention inward, not to escape life, but to prepare to meet it with grace. There is a silence that follows many years of being everything for everyone. It's a silence that doesn't come from peace, but from the weight of unspoken emotions. After 65, this silence becomes louder. And yet, in that silence, there exists a choice. Will you continue to carry the weight of everything left unacknowledged? Or will you begin to gently lay it down? Emotional discipline is not about detachment. It is not about appearing strong by avoiding your feelings. In truth, the strongest among us are not those who suppress, but those who turn inward and begin to listen. Because what remains unfelt remains unresolved, and what is unresolved does not stay quietly inside. It echoes through our relationships, our words, our health. Every morning, before speaking to the world, give yourself 5 minutes of unfiltered honesty. Not with anyone else, just with yourself. Sit down with pen and paper, not to write something beautiful, but something true. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I avoiding? What keeps returning in my mind that I try to push away? What have I not grieved, not expressed, not forgiven? This practice is not spiritual poetry. It is emotional hygiene. The brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, plays a vital role in emotional regulation. When you name an emotion, you reduce its physiological grip. This process, known in neuroscience as affect labeling, has been shown to diminish activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, and activate the areas responsible for calm thinking. What this means practically is that when you name your sorrow or admit your anger, you disarm its power to control you. You no longer become the emotion, you become the observer of it. And in that space, self-mastery begins. There's a widow named Lena who lost her husband of 42 years. In the first year after his passing, she didn't cry, not once. She told everyone she was fine, strong, capable. Until one day while washing dishes, she broke down without warning. She sat on her kitchen floor, sobbing, overwhelmed not just by grief, but by the realization of how much she had refused to feel. The next day, she began what she now calls her morning page ritual. She sits with a notebook and writes 3 uncensored pages, not for anyone to read, not to make sense, just to allow her emotions to exist on paper. It changed her life. She says it made her more available to her children, more patient with herself, and even softened the friendship that had grown distant over the years. When you hold your feelings in, you don't just harm yourself, you place a quiet barrier between yourself and everyone you love. Emotional distance is often born not from a lack of love, but from unprocessed pain. We think we're protecting others by keeping our struggles hidden. But what we're really doing is blocking intimacy. Relationships after 65 are more precious than ever, not because they are fewer, but because they carry the weight of years. These are the relationships built not on novelty, but on depth, yet without emotional transparency, even with oneself. They can grow cold, familiar but distant, kind but disconnected. This is why the emotional inventory each morning matters, because it clears the residue of old emotion that quietly accumulates. Think of it like cleaning a window through which you see the world. If you don't wipe it down, slowly the view becomes blurred, not because the world changed, but because the lens did. And here lies a deeper truth. You can't meet someone else emotionally if you haven't first met yourself. When you know what lives inside of you, you become less reactive, less defensive, less prone to misreading others. You stop making assumptions based on past wounds. You begin to respond, not just react. And in relationships, this is the difference between conflict and clarity. There's a practice in certain contemplative traditions where, before speaking, the practitioner silently asks themselves 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? These questions are impossible to answer honestly if you haven't taken the time to check in with your emotional state. Because when you're angry but unaware of it, your words are rarely kind. When you're hurt but pretending to be fine, your responses become laced with confusion. But when you've acknowledged your feelings, even if they haven't fully healed, you move through the world with more integrity. The more emotionally honest you are with yourself, the more emotionally safe you become for others. Children, partners, friends, they may not understand the specifics of your emotional journey, but they can feel your authenticity. And in that space, they begin to open too. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Honesty invites honesty. There is a woman named Fatima who for many years kept her resentment buried toward her sister. They spoke, but never deeply. Then one morning, during her journaling, she wrote, "I miss what we never had the chance to become." That sentence broke her open. She called her sister the next day, not to blame, but to speak from the tenderness of that realization. That conversation changed their entire dynamic. Not because it fixed everything, but because it allowed something real to enter the space between them. It became the starting point of a new kind of closeness, born not of shared history, but of shared honesty. This is the quiet power of emotional discipline. It doesn't scream, it doesn't need to be performed. It simply creates space, first within, then between. And it's from that space that the next practice naturally flows. Conscious connection. One soul, each day. Loneliness is not just the absence of people. It is the absence of depth. One can be surrounded by others and still feel alone, especially in later years, when social circles shrink, children move away, or partners pass, the ache of invisibility can set in. But the remedy is not in quantity. It is in quality. Decide each morning, who will I connect with today? Not out of obligation, not just to fill the silence, but to offer and receive presence. Presence is the rarest gift you can give. It is not found in distraction or multitasking. It is in the way you look at someone when they speak, the way you ask, "How are you?" and actually listen. It is in the quiet pause before replying, in the willingness to be fully where you are. Oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding and trust, is released not through grand gestures, but through these small moments of attuned connection. A hand on the shoulder, eye contact, a shared laugh, a gentle silence. These moments regulate your nervous system, lower blood pressure, and even reduce inflammation. But more than that, they renew your sense of belonging. In a small town in Portugal, an elderly woman named Clara calls her neighbor every morning. Not to say anything profound, just to check in. A ritual of care. Sometimes they speak for 2 minutes, sometimes 20, but both of them have said this one small daily act has given them more vitality than any medicine. The human heart, especially in aging, needs warmth. It needs to be felt. It needs to be received. And while technology has given us many ways to stay in touch, it is real presence that nourishes. Even a shared cup of tea with a friend, done with full attention, becomes an act of healing. One meaningful connection per day. It sounds small, but it can change your entire experience of life, because it reminds you that you still matter, that your words are still heard, that your essence is still felt. But presence begins with intention, and intention begins in the morning. Ask yourself, who might need to feel seen today? Who can I reach out to? Not to fix, but to accompany. Sometimes that person is not a family member. It might be someone in line at the store, a former colleague, a grandchild, a neighbor. The point is not who, it's how. It's not the frequency, it's the sincerity. And here is something often overlooked. The way we connect with others is often a mirror of how we connect with ourselves. If you are rushed and dismissive toward your own feelings, you will be rushed and dismissive toward others' emotions. If you ignore your inner world, you will struggle to be present for someone else's. But when you start each day with emotional honesty and choose one connection to nurture with intention, you begin to live relationally rather than habitually. Conversations become more than exchanges. They become bridges. Moments become more than routine. They become nourishment. There's a depth that becomes available in relationships when presence replaces performance. When love becomes less about what you do and more about how you show up. This kind of connection doesn't require constant attention. It requires consistent sincerity. So each morning, tend to your emotional soil and then reach out. Not from emptiness, but from fullness. Let your presence become the medicine someone else didn't even know they needed. Let your words carry not just information, but intention. And in doing so, you return to the oldest, deepest truth of human life. We are not meant to live alone in our minds. We are meant to meet each other, soul to soul, moment by moment, in the space between silence and speech. In every moment of life, from the very first cry of a newborn to the final exhale of an elder, there is one companion that never leaves us. It is neither friend nor foe, neither visible nor audible. Yet it shapes our every thought, emotion, and decision. It is the breath. And after the age of 65, when so much of life seems to shift, roles, relationships, even the sense of purpose, it is the breath that remains constant, waiting patiently to be remembered not just as a bodily function, but as a sacred doorway to presence, to power, and to peace. Breathing is often taken for granted precisely because it happens on its own. Yet within this automatic rhythm lies the most profound tool for emotional regulation, physiological balance, and relational clarity. The way a woman breathes in the morning can determine not just her energy for the day, but her tone of voice, the strength of her heartbeat, the fluidity of her thoughts, and even the depth of her connections. Breath is not simply air, it is life force in motion. It carries memory, emotion, and intention. To breathe consciously is to choose how we show up. in our own body, in our mind, and in the presence of others. There is an ancient saying, the mind follows the breath, and the body follows the mind. This is not metaphorical, it is biological. When we take shallow breaths, high in the chest, especially during moments of stress or distraction, we signal the body to remain in a state of alertness. The sympathetic nervous system stays activated, cortisol levels rise, blood vessels constrict, our thoughts race and our conversations become reactive, clipped or confused. But when we engage in deep, rhythmic breathing, especially in the morning, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest system. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, the brain becomes more coherent, and most importantly, the doorway to awareness opens. We begin to perceive the world not from a place of fear or defense, but from calm responsiveness. This is why returning to the breath each morning is not a luxury, it is a necessity, especially for women beyond 65 whose bodies have been carrying for decades, carrying responsibilities, unspoken griefs, long hours of service to others, emotional weight that has rarely been acknowledged, let alone released. The breath becomes the first companion in a daily ritual of return to oneself, to balance, and to the subtle power that is too often forgotten in later life. There was once a woman named Isabel, a retired midwife who had spent over 40 years bringing life into the world. She had held the trembling hands of young mothers, whispered strength into their ears, and breathed with them through pain and fear. Yet when she entered her 70s, she found herself restless and heavy, not physically, but emotionally. One morning, she attended a simple breathing class at a local community center. Nothing elaborate, just seated breathwork for 30 minutes. After that session, she sat alone on a bench, tears quietly streaming down her face. "I've helped so many breathe," she said softly, "but I never realized I had forgotten how to breathe for myself." This moment was not dramatic, but it was transformative. From that day on, she committed to 10 minutes of morning breathwork. Nothing complex, just conscious breathing. Inhale slowly, hold gently, exhale completely. Within weeks, her energy changed. Her family noticed first. Not because she said anything, but because her presence became more grounded. She laughed more. She listened more deeply. She no longer carried the sharp edges of anxiety or the dull weight of fatigue. Something within her had softened and also strengthened. Breath is the bridge between the physical and the emotional. When someone is angry, their breath is quick and shallow. When they are afraid, it's held tight. When they are relaxed, it flows like a quiet stream. In relationships, especially long-term ones where patterns run deep, the way we breathe often mirrors the way we relate. If breath is constricted, so is emotional availability. If breath is rushed, so are our reactions. But when we breathe deeply, we speak differently. We listen more patiently. We touch more gently. We become safe, not just for ourselves, but for others. A woman named Mira once shared her experience in a support group for caregivers. She had been caring for her husband, who was living with early stage Alzheimer's. The stress was immense, the emotional toll even more so. She said that every morning, before getting out of bed, she placed her hand on her belly and practiced 10 slow breaths. Sometimes, she said, "It's the only thing that reminds me I'm still here." That small act helped her center before the day's unpredictability unfolded. Her breath gave her back her identity, not just as a caregiver, but as a woman with an inner world of her own. Breath then becomes more than a tool. It becomes a relationship. And like all relationships, it must be nurtured. Start with presence. Sit upright. Allow the spine to lengthen, not stiffly, but like a tree growing upward with gentle strength. Let the shoulders drop. Unclench the jaw. Close the eyes if it helps. and simply begin to notice the breath, not to control it, but to meet it. At first, the mind may resist. Thoughts may jump in. Memories, worries, old conversations may resurface. But this is part of the process. The breath reveals what the mind has been avoiding. With each inhale, welcome. With each exhale, release. No judgment, no pressure, just presence. Over time, this morning breathing practice begins to rewire not only the brain, but the entire nervous system. The vagus nerve, responsible for regulating many bodily functions, including mood and inflammation, becomes more active with consistent breath work. Heart rate variability improves, which is a key indicator of overall health and emotional resilience.